But anyway, we're glad to be here with you. Certainly thank Farm Credit and my friends at Farm Bureau for joining up with the UK and sponsoring these programs. We actually met back in the spring. You know, we had a farm bill to pass in the end of January, 1st February, the President signed it, and we were hoping we'd have a little bit more in terms of the details after we started planning these meetings. But as I've told the groups all along this week, unfortunately we're not going to be able to answer all your detailed questions because we at the University, Farm Bureau, as well as FSA, NRCS are still waiting for a lot of the details to come out in the regs. And again, some of that information will be coming out in the next few months, and there'll be some decision tools that will help you along the way. But our goal today is to basically stimulate you all to start thinking about what you're going to do with this farm bill. There's going to be some options for you. Let's talk a little bit. My goal in all this is to talk to you about the big picture. I'm going to kind of outline some of the political and economic reasoning behind the farm bill, some of the things that might transpire during the next 5 years as part of this farm bill. And then we'll have Todd talk about some of the options that you as crop farmers will face. And then Joe will finish up talking about some of the options livestock producers will face. So those of you all that will follow the farm bill debate, you know it was a very challenging farm bill. Every one is different, but certainly this one was a big challenge to pull off. A lot of it had to do with the economics of the farm economy. Very strong farm economy throughout most of this farm bill debate. Record farm income, record prices, record trade volume. Land prices were escalating. So you had all these legislators from non-farm districts reading about the strength in the farm economy. Everything else in the U.S. from a business standpoint, from the economic standpoint, was struggling, but the farm economy was doing well. And on the other hand, Washington was trying to eliminate some government costs in terms of the growing federal budget deficit. So again, reductions in government programs, farm economy, all that transpired into efforts of looking into reducing some of the expenditure as part of the farm bill. Most of you all realize the biggest thing that we've battled for the past 3 years in the farm bill debate was our nutrition programs. Nutrition was added to the farm bill back in the 70s because basically a lot of concern amongst the policymakers from farm states that we're going to have some support from urban legislators to keep a farm bill being passed every 4 or 5 years. And as a result, nutrition was part of that debate for several decades in terms of the farm bill. A lot of discussion on how much you're going to cut, because if you're going to cut expenditures in the farm bill, you've got to look at that nutrition program because that's where most of the dollars as part of the farm bill are in the nutrition title. At one point, the Senate passed its version of the farm bill with about $4 billion of cuts over 10 years. The House came back with a $40 billion proposed cut in the nutrition title. And at the end of the day, we ended up with, you can see here, about $8 billion cut from the nutrition title. But that still only represented about 1% of the money allocated in the farm bill budget. The biggest cut, the commodity programs, 24% cut. Joe, some of this was certainly due to the fact that we were working on a lower baseline as a result of some of the changes in farm programs over the past farm bill, but yet at the same time, you can see up there the biggest component in terms of percentage basis of the cut came from the commodity title. Conservation, I think conservation has been in the farm bill since the early 80s, and I think it's true that we've never had cuts in the conservation programs. Have been relatively stable, if not increasing, but this farm bill is 6% cut. The only area that we were successful in getting some additional funding, additional support, is due to the fact that as the farm groups basically realized they were going to have to give up things as part of the commodity title, they wanted to really shore up the crop insurance program. And that is the major component, that is the bedrock of this particular farm bill, is a crop insurance program. And Todd will talk a little bit about some options that we have available as part of the crop insurance title in this farm bill. Again, you look at the distribution of funds available in this farm bill, 80% of the dollars expected outlays in the Farm Bill would be nutrition. The commodity title is only about 5%. Been 15% or so the past couple of farm bills, but this one here, only 5%. Crop insurance was about 6 or 7% on the last farm bill, and now up to 8%. And the other component there you see conservation. So again, nutrition dominated most of the discussion the first couple of years we had in this farm bill debate, but ultimately we got around to talking about some of the issues that you were interested in and some of the things that eventually came out of the farm bill. There was a lot of discussion about, okay, what type of safety net are we going to have? Are we going to have one based on prices, or are we going to have a safety net based on revenues? And you had some, the policymakers, members of Congress from some of the southern states that represented cotton, rice, peanuts. They wanted more of a safety net based on price. Our Midwest folks, basically supported by the corn and soybean associations, wanted a safety net based on revenue. At the end of the day, what we'll see, and many of you all know, we ended up, Jack, with both of those. You're going to have an option. You're going to either have to choose a safety net based on a fixed price or a safety net based upon a revenue component. There was some discussion about planted acres versus historical base acres when we figure these payments. Ultimately, we ended up with a historical base being the component for your payment acres. Some discussion about whether or not to change these price supports or these reference prices throughout the history of the current farm bill, or to have them fixed throughout. And you'll see in a few minutes that Todd will present that we have these fixed reference prices, that if you do choose that safety net based upon prices, that these will be fixed throughout the years of this farm bill. Payment limitations, there was always debate about pulling back on the level of the payment limitations overall, and we've got those in place. We've got some conservation compliance components we're going to talk about, dairy reforms. And then the last thing that was a significant amount of debate was whether or not to keep this farm bill permanent legislation moving forward, or Javier, do we continue to go back to the 38 and 49 Act and basically force Congress to revisit the farm bill over a 5-year period? And ultimately, we still have that 38 and 49 Act in place. So we think, Joe, in the next 2 or 3 years, we'll probably start discussing the 2018 or 19 Farm Bill, but we'll see how that comes about. And again, that's going to be still back towards that 38 and 49 Act as kind of a trigger to try to encourage Congress to address those issues. The one thing that was not part not sure. Maybe it's my cell phone here. This is the first time we've taped these presentations, and you can see we're trying to figure this out. The one thing that was not part of the debate that certainly was a big part of the last Farm Bill was the direct payments. Why do you think we had a hard time keeping that as part of this particular Farm Bill? What did I say early on about the farm economy? Yeah, very, very strong. So obviously, I guess Joe, Farm Bureau resigned early on that direct payments were not going to be part of this Farm Bill, because there was so much criticism that farmers receiving payments during a strong farm economy, whether or not, you know, irrespective of the income levels or prices that we had as part of the economic environment during the Farm Bill. So those are the things that we're going to talk about specifically here in a few minutes. Again, this Farm Bill covers the next 5 years, the 2014 crops through the 2018. DCP is eliminated, but in its place we've got a safety net where we have it based upon a couple of programs, one based on price and one based on revenue. We're going to talk a little bit with Todd here in a few minutes about your opportunity to reallocate your base acres, and also an opportunity to update your payment yields. New insurance program, new dairy program. We have, as you all know, a lot of different conservation programs, and we have a consolidation now in the Farm Bill. I think it went from 23 conservation programs to, I think, 13 or 14 in terms of the programs. Many of the same programs that you're used to in the past are still available. We do have a rollback in CRP acreage. The maximum enrollment, I think, is going to be ratcheted down from 27 million acres to, I think, 24.5 million by 2018. And then Joe will talk a little bit about a livestock disaster program that has been made permanent as part of this Farm Bill. So again, that's kind of the skeleton outline we're going to follow. What I'm going to do in the next 5 or 10 minutes is just try to outline what I perceive and many of my colleagues across the nation perceive as the economic environment that we're going to confront during this future Farm Bill, or this current Farm Bill. And the one thing, obviously, that you all are interested in, that's the heart and soul of a lot of this Farm Bill, is what's going to happen for crop prices, because your expectations and what transpires in terms of crop prices in the future is really going to dictate a lot about what decision you're going to make on whether you're going to take this safety net based on prices or a safety net based on revenues. I think all of us realized as grain farmers when we had $6, $7 plus corn that was some of anomaly. Jack, those $15 plus soybeans were pretty good, but reality we knew eventually would set in. We knew that not only we would try to increase acres here in Kentucky, but all across the nation, even all across the world. And in fact, I've been telling the story all week that I took a group to South Africa back in January. And many of you all think about Africa, you think about small subsistence type agriculture. But we went to one farm that was a small family, well, they said they were a family farm, a mom and a dad, 2 brothers and a sister. And they said the price of corn has been pretty good the past few years. We decided to raise 27,000 acres. And you know, that type of mentality across the world, seed genetics, good weather conditions that we've had in the Midwest this year, and as a result, we're not looking obviously at $5 or $6 corn, we're looking at $3.50 corn, and many of you all concerned even it possibly might even go lower. So crop prices currently, and the expectation as we go into next year, we're going to have ample supplies of many of our grains, and not only in the United States but worldwide. They're going to be relatively low. These are some estimates that the University of Missouri, FAPRI, many of you all may be aware of this particular entity. They do a lot of economic simulations. They throw in some of their expectations or assumptions on economic parameters, some weather variables, and they come up with forecasts of what they expect prices to be over the history of this Farm Bill. Now keep in mind that this computer model is throwing out hundreds of different potential prices, but these, what I have up here, represent the average over those hundreds and hundreds of simulations. The green line here is their expectation over the history of this Farm Bill moving forward, that even though some of the simulations, Jack, would indicate corn prices $4 and $5 a bushel, some would indicate $3.50, below $3 a bushel, that on average they're projecting that corn prices will decline to below $4 a bushel by the end of this Farm Bill. And that will have some implications when Todd mentions a little bit about the revenue and price components of this particular Farm Bill. So again, their expectations are that corn prices will hover around $4. I think wheat around $5.25, $5.50, somewhere in that range, and soybeans somewhere around $10 a bushel. Now you all know that these economic models and ag economists are about as accurate long term as the 5 and 10 day weather forecast. So keep all this with a grain of salt, but yet most of the analysts out there, I think, and most of you all in this room will realize, will probably say that we have a higher probability that prices are going to be in these ranges in the next few years than what we saw in 2012 and 2013, just to be realistic about the situation. Now that doesn't mean, obviously, we're going to have weather shocks. We may have some demand shocks. Markets may open, may close. We're going to have a lot of volatility in prices like we've had the past several years in this type of ag economy. So we're going to have volatility. They're not going to be smooth like that. But again, the probability is that the prices will be lower than we've seen the past few years. So that's what we've got on the crop side. Livestock side, you all know that things are pretty good right now. Tight supplies of most of our livestock enterprise or commodities, and at the same time, lower feed cost. And unlike grains that you can ratchet up acreage and production from year to year, we know it takes time to build up those beef herds and those dairy herds and dairy output. And as a result, the expectations are that livestock prices are going to be relatively strong in the coming years. This slide here is looking at their expectations of steer prices in the coming years. And basically, you can see here, we've got still the growing steer price. We do the tight supplies, lower feed costs during the first couple of years of this farm bill. Eventually see prices fall a little bit, but again, still remaining relatively high compared to where we were the past decade. Dairy, again, not at the level we are today as dairy supplies begin to build, but still considerably higher than what we experienced a few years ago. So this will be important when Joe talks a little bit about the dairy program, because the all milk price is a very big component of the dairy margin option that Joe will visit with you on. So again, crop prices coming down, livestock prices remaining relatively high through the next few years. What about input cost? And certainly many of you all realize one of the biggest input costs that you all have from a crop farmer is land cost, either buying land or renting land. And again, the situation, if you look at land values, we've heard all these situations out in the Midwest of escalating land values. We've seen that here in Kentucky, maybe not to the same degree. But land values really are dependent upon two factors. They're dependent upon your expectations or the investor's expectations of future anticipated returns from that land, and also interest rates. So you tell me if expectations are that anticipated future returns are coming down and interest rates, which direction do we think they'll eventually go? Only pretty much one direction for those to go up. What does that say for future land prices, land values? It's going to put some pressure on them. Again, I don't think we'll have the rapid adjustment as maybe some of the states out in the Midwest, but there's going to be some downward pressure, I think, on land values. And then as these margins begin to thin out a little bit, it's going to cause, I think, some conversation between landowners and growers out there, renters of land, to look at some of these rental arrangements. So again, that dialogue is going to probably continue as part of this farm bill. Other input costs, I think the expectations are that we'll see some ratcheted up in terms of wage rates, seed cost, fertilizer prices, at least in the short term, look fairly favorable. Higher interest rates. Basically, as I said, lower money available from this farm bill. And as a result, we're going to have tighter margins. And the reason I mention this as we go forward is not to put a scare into you, but just to be realistic. As these margins become tighter and tighter, that causes us to really think a lot about this farm bill. A few years ago, when we had $15 beans and we had $6 and $7 corn, a lot of you all probably weren't going to worry too much about learning about the 2014 farm bill because the market was going to take care of itself. But now these margins are thin, and they're going to get thinner as we move forward in this farm bill. And what Todd is going to show here in a few minutes is even though the economic outlook for agriculture is not as rosy today as it was a few years ago, that this farm bill does have a way, if you take it, the farm programs, and accompany them with some of the crop insurance options that you're going to have, you're going to be able to cover some of these smaller margins. In fact, some of the negative margins that may come about if you account for all economic costs as part of the environment we're facing right now. So again, I know that if you're a grain farmer, you're concerned about where we are now, and you may be more concerned as you look at some of these price forecasts about what's going to happen in the future as these supplies build up. But again, that's what the Farm Bill is there for, is to provide this safety net. And that's what we're hoping, that you'll begin to think a little bit about, understand your options you're going to have, because you're going to have some time to think about these options. But certainly take advantage of some opportunities we have as part of the safety net in this Farm Bill to protect yourself in the future. So with that, I'm going to stop, and we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, where Todd will come up and visit with you about these different options that we have available for you as a crop farmer as part of this Farm Bill. And again, you're going to have to make some decisions in the coming months that's going to impact you for the history of this Farm Bill for all 5 years. So with that, I'll turn it over to Todd, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions as he gets into the meat of the presentation on Farm Bill options for our crop farmers.
I call this presentation the 2014 Farm Bill Details and Decisions. And unfortunately, without the regulations, I can't really give you all the details. And without all the regulations, I can't really drive or help you with making a decision. So I guess I'm just another guy from DC making all these promises I can't keep. A brief outline. We're going to talk about the payment yield update decision and base acre reallocation decision. And I know you've been reading in the farm press, you know, the real tough one is going to be PLC versus ARC. We're going to talk about that. Crop insurance and how all your other farm program decisions are going to fit on top of your crop insurance decision. Talk a little bit about conservation compliance. And then I'm going to work through an example to try to illustrate how these tools can be used in a risk management program, looking at the budgeted corn return for 2014. And then talk briefly about a couple decision tools that are going to come out, hopefully soon, to help in making your decisions. So, have to give a disclaimer. Everything I'm talking to you about is based on my interpretation of the Farm Bill, what I've heard from other ag economists, and conversation with former colleagues at Farm Bureau. And, you know, I don't have a 100% record with being right, just ask my wife. So there's going to be differences in how I interpret this and the way the folks in the USDA building will interpret the rules. So whatever USDA comes out with is going to be right. Even if you don't like it, you're going to have to live with it. So let's just consider all this presentation as educational to get you thinking about some upcoming decisions. And more and better information is going to be available. Once the regulations are out, we'll be doing more of these meetings. So you're going to have plenty of opportunities to hear about the Farm Bill and how you can make your decisions. So I pulled together a slide, you know, thinking maybe there's an easy way to explain this whole decision framework. And I started drawing it. It's dawned on me, you know, no way around it. This is a bit complicated. You can't just hide the fact that you have some complicated decisions. So I just have a dividing line here. This side over here is your Title I programs, the programs administered by FSA. And so you have three basic decisions. One is, do you want to update your payment yield? A separate decision is the reallocation of base acres. And then the big one is ARC versus PLC. Now, if you choose ARC, then you get to choose between a county level program or a farm level program. If you choose PLC, then you have another decision, which is on the insurance side, which is administered by RMA. And your decision with PLC is, do I want to participate in a new crop insurance product called Supplemental Coverage Option, or SCO? Now, everything on FSA is a one-time decision, and you can't change it after the fact. So you have to make a decision and live with it. Everything under RMA is an annual decision. And you're used to that, right? You go in every spring, you decide if you want to change your crop insurance coverage, or maybe go from yield protection to revenue protection. So RMA is an annual decision. So for base reallocation, one thing that could be frustrating, if you add a lot of cow-calves and you, as Will said, bulldozed the fences, brought the pasture land into crop production, if you don't have any base on that land, you can't increase the base. You only reallocate what you have to reflect what you're currently growing. All these decisions are made by the landowner, and it applies to all your covered crops, and it's in effect with the 2014 crop year. You really have two choices: to retain the base as it was on September 30th of 13, or to reallocate a portion of what you were producing from 2009 to 12. What is a little bit tricky with this is the treatment of prevented planted acres. If you had a crop that was prevented from planting, you can allocate it to that crop that you did plant. But if you were able to get a subsequent crop planted, you could allocate that acreage to the subsequent crop. That's kind of wordy, so let's try it with numbers. Say you wanted to plant 100 acres of corn, but you could only plant 80. You can count those 20 acres as prevented planting of corn. But if you planted those 20 acres of soybeans, you can count those in with soybeans. But you can't do both, because that would be trying to grow your base, and USDA doesn't like that. Now, prevented planting has to be because it was a natural disaster. If something happened in your life and you just couldn't get everything planted, and if USDA says it's not a disaster, it doesn't count for prevented planting. You can count double crop acres if it's an established practice. So if double cropping is an established practice here, you can count that. Where I'm from in Iowa, not an established practice, couldn't count it. And base acres can't exceed the total crop acres, except for the amount of double crop acres. So let's look at an example. Let's say that on September 30th you had 100 acres of base, 50 in corn, 35 in beans, 15 in wheat. And then from 2009 to 12, you didn't plant any wheat. 2/3 of your land went to corn, 1/3 to beans. So what they do is they'll take the average over your 4 years, and you can reallocate this 100 acres to 67.5 acres of corn, 32.5 acres of beans. So that's your decision. Do you want to keep this mix over here, or update it to what you have been producing most recently? A separate decision is updating your payment yield. Again, this is made by the landowner. You can only have one chance to make this decision, then you have to live with it for the life of the bill. You can make this decision on a crop-by-crop basis. So you can, for example, you can update corn, but if your bean yields, you can leave those alone if that works best for you. And you can, your choice is to retain your 2013 countercyclical payment yield, or update it to 90% of the average of yields from 08 to 12. If you didn't plant a crop during the year, you're not penalized for it. It's just not included in the average calculation. And there's also a yield plug that if you had a bad year, the farm yield is below 75% of the 4-year average for the county, you can use 75% of that 4-year average. And you can make this decision independent of reallocating base. So if you don't change your base acres, you can change your payment yield. So just a quick example. The first thing, they will look at your county average from 2008 to 12 and take 75% of that. So in this example, that's 107 bushels. So in this example, in 08, you planted the crop, but for some reason you don't have any history. Not a problem. You could use the county yield. And then in the next couple years, your yield on a planted acre basis was above the plug yield, so you use those numbers. In 2011, you didn't plant any corn, so you don't have a number here in the calculation. And in 2012, it was an utter disaster. You harvested 35 bushels an acre, but the county did okay, or you can use the county yield. So your 08 to 12 average, the average of these 4 years, would be 134 bushels. 90% of that is 120 bushels an acre. So your decision is, you look at your information from FSA, they'll give you a letter, they'll tell you what your payment yield is under the countercyclical program, and you pick the higher of the two yields. And I would encourage you to think about updating your PLC yield, payment yield, even if you're not going to use PLC. Because, Will talked about the tough, challenging political and economic environment in DC to get this last bill passed. And I really wouldn't expect things to improve out there, so you never really know when you're going to get another opportunity to update your history, your payment history. So I'd really encourage you to think about it and consider updating your yields. Now the Farm Bill. And I know you've seen this before, probably too much. You probably heard Will talk to you right after the Farm Bill was passed. And you've probably been reading about it on DTN farm magazines, so try to move quickly. You have 3 different Title I programs. PLC, the price protection, price loss coverage, similar to the countercyclical payment program. Then you have the revenue coverage, ARC County, ARC Individual. Now ARC Individual is kind of misleading because it sounds like it should be exactly like ARC County, but it's pretty unique. It's kind of detailed and complicated. It gives Joe Kane a headache whenever I talk about it. And then you have a separate product on the insurance side, SCO. So one good thing about having those higher commodity prices was that the folks writing the Farm Bill were able to increase the reference prices without increasing the cost. As much as Washington considers the cost of anything, they project the likelihood of making a payment. And when the Farm Bill was written, 370 corn seemed like something that wasn't going to trigger a payment very frequently. So they felt really comfortable increasing the reference price from 263 to 370. In beans, they stepped up from 6 to 840, and wheat from 417 to 550. So that was one benefit of those higher prices. The politicians felt comfortable on a budget standpoint of increasing your reference prices. And I'll move quickly. It's a price program. Payments are made whenever the market year average price falls below the reference. You're paid on your payment yield, which is either your CCP yield or that updated value. You're paid on base acres. And for budgetary reason, you're paid on 85% of the base. So if you have 100 acres of corn base, payment yield's 150 bushels, the market year average price is 350. So reference price is 370, market year average price is 350. Would there be a payment? Well, I tell you what, Dr. Snell says he has his first class tomorrow on campus, and I bet you're about as excited as the undergrads. course, it's yes. You guys are just shy. I understand. Okay, and it's on a handout. So it's 20 cents per bushel, paid on 150 bushels by 100 base acres, 85% of that. In this example, your total PLC payment would be $2,550. Our county, this is the revenue-based program, and this was put forward by the Corn and the Soybean Association separately. They had two different programs. But their philosophy was, you know, we've had historic prices and we have a limited budget, so let's find a way to have a benchmark that captures where prices have been most recently. And so the guarantees the 5-year Olympic average county yield and the 5-year Olympic average marking year price. So do you guys know what an Olympic average is? All right, it's like the Olympics, the figure skating. You got 5 judges. You ignore France. You ignore Russia. You take the scores of the 3 remaining. So in this, so for the farm program, for the marking year average price, you toss out the high and the low price. Take the average of the remaining 3. You cover losses between 86% and 76% of the benchmark revenue. That's just saying that the first 14% loss is going to be absorbed by you. Paid on 85% of base, and you can enroll in our county on a crop-by-crop basis. So if you think maybe this will work for corn, enroll in it. If you think maybe PLC is better for wheat, you can put wheat into PLC. If you think soybeans are better into PLC, put them into PLC. So let's look at this graphically. This first 14% loss on revenue is absorbed by you. Then ARC would start making payments here from the 86% down to 76%. And that's paid on your base acreage. But it's capped here at 10% of your benchmark. Then this big green box is crop insurance. And so the philosophy of this farm bill is crop insurance is the safety net. Everything that you can add to it is kind of like icing on your cake, you know, but you're there to eat the cake, not the icing. And so, you know, in this case, you have RP insurance at the 75% coverage level, and that's subsidized at the 66% of the premium is paid by the government. So let's look at a numeric example. This is also in the handout. If your Olympic average corn price is $5.30, which is what it will be for this year, and your Olympic average county yield on a planted acre basis is 151, that gives you a benchmark revenue of $800. Now remember, your guarantee is 86% of that, right? Because the first 14% loss is on you. That gives you a guarantee of $688. ARC caps its payments to 10% of the benchmark, so the largest payment you could get out of ARC would be $80. And in this example, you have 100 acres of base. So say the county harvests 160 bushel corn on a planted acre basis, and the marketing average price is $4 a bushel. Your actual revenue is $640. Your guarantee was $688. Would there be a payment? Yes, yes. Thanks for playing along. The payment would be $48 times 100 times 85%, or a little bit over $4,000. Now, ARC individual. I had to deviate from the example in your handout because that example in your handout is way too clean. And I wanted to show you that there's a lot more details behind ARC individual. Your benchmark revenue is based on the revenue of all the covered commodities on your farm, all across all the farms in which the producer has an interest. So your benchmark is your 5-year Olympic average revenue across all the covered commodities on your farms, weighted by the current year plantings. It covers losses between 86% and 76% of your farm revenue. But because it's a farm program, you're only paid on 65% of base acres. And that's purely budgetary reasons, right? Because from a standpoint of triggering payments, would you expect farm-based protection to be more expensive or less expensive than something on a county basis? More expensive, right? So they had to fit all this into their budget, they had to reduce the payment acres down to 65% of your base. Now this is the headache slide. Well, maybe Joe got a headache earlier. This example is a 500-acre farm producing corn, soybeans, and wheat. This is the yield history from 09 to 13. These are the market year average prices for the U.S. So you calculate the revenue each year. And you take the Olympic average revenue for each commodity. So for corn, you would toss out the 1213 and the 620 and take the average of those remaining three. And I'm not good with math, that's why I became an economist. But I use Excel. And so it came up with the average of revenue of 723 for corn, 650 for beans, 327 for wheat. So for this example, say you planted 200 acres of corn, 200 acres of beans, and 100 acres of wheat. Your benchmark would be 40% of that number, plus 40% of that number, plus 20% of that number. And Excel tells me that is $614 per acre as your benchmark. Your guarantee is 86% of that, or $528, and your maximum payments would be 10% of your benchmark, or $61. Hang with me, folks. We're almost done with this example. So, in this example, the August WASD is projecting market year average prices for corn at $390, beans $1035, wheat $630. These are the farm level yields. Calculate the farm level revenue, put it on a per acre basis, $490. Your guarantee was $528. Would there be a payment? Yeah, you know, I would only say give you a no answer if I was teaching a class just to mess with the minds of the undergrads, because I'm kind of strange like that. But yes, there would be a payment. In this case, $38 per base acre. If you have 450 acres of base, this program would pay a little over $11,000. Now I'll stop here, and do you have any questions about these different programs so far? Yes, sir.
When they say you're going to get paid on base acres,
Yeah.
does that mean you have to plant those base acres for that crop to get the payment?
You know, that's an interesting question, right? Because that was the big criticism of direct payments, right? You had folks like me that aren't. I mean, I'm a partner in the farm, but I'm not out there sweating on the tractor like my brother. And I was collecting direct payments. There is nothing in the legislation that says you have to plant.
So if you have a farm with 100 corn base acres and no beans and wheat, and you plant all beans and there's corn triggers, you will get paid on those base acres of corn even though.
Unless the regulations say otherwise. There is no, since it's planted on base. That was a big deal with cotton. I mean, just giving you history. There's a lot of folks in the South that had cotton base, but because economics was saying don't plant cotton, you were still getting direct payments. And we're talking direct payments that could easily be over $100 an acre. So And so I'm waiting to see if USDA puts any sort of provision in the regs.
That would be important from our 2015 planning decision, like wheat, corn, wheat, or what my decision would be in 2015.
Well, you know what? When I was in Clemson, and you had cotton farmers sticking with cotton, even though the market was telling them plant anything else, because by God, they wanted to plant cotton in case they could update the base in the future. And that, I'm an economist. I believe the market sends signals, and I think you shouldn't base your planning decisions on your government program payments. It ought to be what the market is signaling, what you know your cost structure, you know the productivity of your soils. You can figure out what crop mix can provide the best return for you. I don't think it's a good use of your time to try to figure out how to play the government, especially when the payments are uncertain and most likely to decline over time. I mean, that's my opinion. But, well, and I know where you're coming from because I have met a few folks, of course not here, who would play that game of trying to farm the government. And I don't think that's as lucrative as it used to be. And of course that's videotaped, so I feel good about having that out there. That's right. At this point, there is no, but I can't, right? The philosophy has been since freedom to farm that you don't force farmers into any sort of planning. And so that would be a major philosophical change. And I cannot imagine USDA, I mean, I've given up figuring out with certainty what the South Building is going to do. But my senior colleague just walked out. I doubt it. I doubt they're going to put any sort of planning provisions in there. So the $1 million question is, what program is going to pay out or make the larger payments over the life of the Farm Bill? And of course, if I knew that answer with certainty, I would be not working for a university. But have colleagues at the University of Missouri, FAPRI, they do a lot of Farm Bill analysis. Of course, they worry about the whole country. They model the corn sector, the soybean sector, the wheat sector, and this is their projections. For corn, they have the average payments for ARC and PLC for the corn sector. So that's averaging North Dakota and Iowa and everybody else that grows corn. And it looks like our county, for the first couple years, will make larger payments in PLC, be about the same in the third year, and then in the out years, PLC would make larger payments. And what's behind that is, remember those price projections that Dr. Snell put up where corn was hovering around $4 a bushel on average? Well, the way ARC has their benchmark, the first couple years, because of the Olympic average, that benchmark revenue is really high. And then as prices fall, that benchmark moves itself lower. And you see that in the potential payments. Right? As prices fall and they go below the reference price, PLC starts to pay out more frequently and make larger payments. So you get, for soybeans, it's a similar pattern. Payments aren't as high because the bean yields aren't as high as corn yields. But you're looking at the first 3 years, ARC making slightly larger payments in PLC, about the same amount in year 4. Then maybe PLC paying out a little bit more than ARC on year 5. And again, that comes back to the price projections. There's a lot of reasons why soybeans may not fall down to $8.40 a bushel. Because you got, China has a very strong demand for soybeans, soybean meal. You have a lot of fundamental reasons why beans may not fall below the reference price as frequently as corn. over the next 5 years. Now wheat is kind of a unique story where it looks like a push the first year, and then PLC would be projected to make larger payments than ARC. And a lot of that comes back to your price assumptions. The slide that Dr. Snell put up had that wheat price sitting on top of the reference price. So it comes down to what do you want to assume for prices over the next 5 years, and are you optimistic or pessimistic? If you're kind of pessimistic, you think prices are going to go low and stay low, you get something like this. If you think, prices are going to be at or above your reference price, ARC would look a little better. So, the new crop insurance product is SCO. And if you choose PLC, it allows you to purchase an area-based insurance product that would cover, on an area basis, 86% of the expected revenue down to your coverage level of the underlying product. So if you buy RP insurance at the 65% coverage level, SCO would provide protection on an area basis between 86% down to 65%. You can't buy it if you choose to use ARC. And there's going to be some language in the regs that would make sure you do not get an indemnity that's greater than the underlying deductible, right? Because the government doesn't want you to collect twice on the same risk. But one thing about SCO is the premiums are going to be subsidized at the 65% level. So, just thinking about this, say you buy RP insurance at the 75% level, SCO would sit on top of that from 86 to 75. Of course, remember, this is a farm level product. This is an area product. So if you're in a county where your farm yields track really well with the county, this might be an attractive product for you. But the first 14% loss is on you. You absorb that. Now, a couple items of concern is conservation compliance and how that affects crop insurance. Specifically for highly erodible land and wetlands. And there's a pretty major penalty in the Farm Bill that if you're out of compliance, you will lose your eligibility for the crop insurance premiums, subsidies. But you only are ineligible after USDA reaches a final determination of a violation. And then it's not retroactive. So if you're not in compliance and you are warned that you need to get into compliance and you don't comply, you're in violation, could be 2 years from now, you would lose the premiums in the future. They're not going to come back and get you for subsidies you received in the past. But there's a way to remain eligible. You need to file a conservation plan that's approved by NRCS and stick with that. And there's going to be some time. It's not like as soon as the regs are out, NRCS is going to start policing this and cut out the subsidies. You're going to have at least 2 years to get a plan in place and to follow it. And as I think Joe likes to point out, that the government doesn't move with any sort of speed or efficiency, and so we could be a few years down the road on this Farm Bill before everything's in place, and if you're not in compliance, that they start cutting off the subsidies. And the wetlands compliance is really an issue for sure where I grew up, and it's kind of vague, at least in my mind, on how this is going to be implemented. It depends on when the wetlands was converted. If it's converted after the bill was signed in February, then you would be ineligible in subsequent years. But if you converted less than 5 acres of wetland there is a provision where you could pay 150% of the cost of mitigation, and then after you make that payments, you get your subsidies. Now, and the million-dollar question is, if you converted these wetlands prior to the signing of the bill, would this be grandfathered in? And we don't know. So, putting it all together, one thing I guess I was curious to see is, so we have the safety net sitting out here. What would it do for 2014? And so I pulled out a Kentucky budget where they have the budget yield 150 bushels, also looked at 10% lower yields. The August WASD is projecting 2014 marking year average prices ranging from $3.55 for corn up to $4.25, the midpoint $3.90. So you look at the revenue here. In the budgets, your variable costs are $3.73 per acre. Land costs $175. And that's either cash rent paid or the opportunity cost of land. And then you got some fixed costs, depreciation, interest, taxes, insurance. And you come up with a return over total variable cost. So it looks like even with lower prices and lower yields, looks like you should be able to cover your input costs. Where you can start to get into a bind would be on the land cost, especially at lower yields and lower prices. And of course, if you're not paying for inputs and land, you're not getting your fixed costs covered as well. So this is where crop insurance and the farm program payments should be able to help out. So look at RP insurance. The RP projected price is known. It was set in February, and for corn it's $4.62 a bushel. The harvest price is set in October, so I just made some assumption on the potential harvest time prices. This example, you harvest, you have no production loss. Harvest the same as your APH yield. And at the higher coverage level, you might be able to get an indemnity, especially with lower prices. For sure, if you have production loss and lower prices, you might be able to get an indemnity even at 80% or 75% coverage. Again, depending on the degree of your production loss and where harvest prices end up. So this is the key part of the safety net. So let's look at ARC. And I looked at Union County for this example. Your guarantee is about $700. And so you look at actual revenues just through price alone. Well, price gets you most of the way to making a maximum ARC payment, which in this case would be adjusted for your base about $70. The only under my price yield scenario where you don't get a maximum ARC payment is when you get 425 corn and 150 bushel corn. So if something happens, we get a rally in the market and the marking year average price is at 425, you still have an ARC payment, but it would not be the maximum in this example. And of course, PLCs out there, if the marking year average price is below 370, there would be a payment. And so in this example, if you get 355 corn for the marking year, your payment for Union County in this example would be an additional $16. So tying this all together, you have your insurance at the highest coverage level in our county. So in my example, this safety net could provide anywhere from $50 to about $140. That would be enough to cover all your economic costs, even with lower prices and lower yields. Now, crop insurance and PLC does provide some payments, but in this example, not enough to cover all your economic costs. So the point of this is, well, there's a couple. When is your RP projected price determined for crop insurance? It's in the springtime, right? It's in February. Well, this year, because there was still some uncertainty about stocks and production and whatnot, the RP price for corn is $4.62 a bushel. Now, my crystal ball is not clear enough to tell me with certainty what the price will be for next February, but what are your expectations? Lower, yeah. So that safety net for crop insurance adjusts quickly to prices. Our county, because of that Olympic average calculation, that's going to come down more slowly. But if we do get the doom and gloom scenario that Dr. Snell put up there with low commodity prices throughout the life of the bill, eventually that Olympic average price is going to converge to the reference price level. So your safety net, while it's pretty high right now, if we get a series of low prices year after year after year after year after year, is going to come down. And then when I said that last night, Dr. Snell was tempting everybody about, the hotel bar, and unfortunately we don't have that as something to console you. So I'll stop depressing you and just tell you there's going to be two different groups of land-grant universities working on decision tools. One is a group out of University of Illinois. The other one is a combination of Texas A&M and the University of Missouri. And like all of us, they're waiting for the regs, so they make sure they get it right before they roll these things out and get in the hands of producers. But as they roll out these tools, they're going to have an opportunity to train the extension specialists and agents so we understand what's going on and we'll be better able to work with you. Now quickly, a timeline, and this is from a colleague who used to work with Farm Bureau. His projections on when stuff's going to happen, and it's still kind of a guess because USDA works in mysterious ways, and they have kind of a fluid timeline. But by now you should have received your letter from FSA that has your payment yields and your base acreage. Okay, I got mine from Iowa about a month ago. And so this is the opportunity to get your records out and make sure they have the right data, right information, because, correct the errors if they exist right now. And then later this fall, and Joe will give you better details, you're going to have regulations come out. And then expectation is late this year, early next year, is the decision of ARC versus PLC. So, it's not like you have to run home tonight and make a decision. I would encourage you to use this time, get your data, get your information collected, see if there's any errors, and start, getting your ducks in a row so when the tools are out, you're able to run different scenarios and see which of these programs would be best for you. So anyway, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have.
The one thing that you've heard from Dr. Snell and from Dr. Davis is that this farm bill is completely different than any of our previous farm bills. And Jack, we talked about this in our advisory committee meeting not too long ago. But before I go any further, I want to recognize two of my colleagues. I've got Stacy Lowe, who is our area program director for this area. I'm glad Stacy's here. And then Ed McQueen, our commodity specialist. What is your title exactly, Ed? He's a do-all.
Director of Market Information.
Director of Market Information. The one thing I will tell you, if you don't get it and you want to get it, Ed does a tremendous electronic newsletter called Between the Rows. See him before you leave to get signed up for that. It comes out every week, and it's got tremendous information in it that will be helpful. And as we get the regulations to the Farm Bill finally published, you'll get a lot more information. There'll be links. There'll be a lot of links to the tools that Ed will provide through that newsletter. So see Ed before you leave if you want to get that. But again, this Farm Bill is a huge change. Every part of the commodity title is a huge change from previous years. So that's the reason why we wanted to have these meetings. We started these meetings almost immediately after the Farm Bill was passed. And then we said, wait a minute, time out. We don't have the regulations. It's kind of wrong for us to talk about what's going on before we get the regulations. So then we set up, and kudos to Farm Credit for wanting to do these meetings. We set up the meeting to discuss when do we want to do these programs to get the word out to the farm base. And we said, well, surely we'll have the regulations by now. Because one thing, when you look at the dairy programs by the Farm Bill, we'll see in just a second, were to be in place September 1st. Now, when is September 1st? Monday. Okay. It hadn't been published, but I have pretty good information that it's coming really, really soon. Because Javier, thank you so much for the information you provided. It provided some clarity. But Javier with Kentucky Farm Service Agency and then Marcinda are both here to help us with a lot of the information. And then Randy, are you here somewhere? Randy Smallwood, the state agronomist of the NRCS, is here. That kind of comes into play whenever we start talking about the conservation compliance aspects. So we got a couple of good experts here that if we have some questions on some of these tough issues, see them after we adjourn, and they'll be able to help you walk through some of this stuff. But again, very complicated. It's very important that you get the details of your farming operation listed. Make sure you got good records. The letter that came out from FSA a couple weeks ago, that's really to get you started in that process. Pull your data together on your farming operation so that whenever we do make this decision, when the rules are finally announced for the ARC or the PLC program, you've got the data in front of you and you'll be able to plug it into the tools that will be developed. Those tools will be developed and be very helpful for making the decision on which program will be the best way to go. But you've got to have good records. And at the very end, we'll talk about a couple of disaster programs that were made retroactive. And it's very critical, David, that you have those records to be able to go and make those claims on those programs. So use this time to pull your records together. Todd was talking about when or the timing of when this may come about. And when you look at the way USDA generally moves stuff or when the federal agencies generally move things, you generally have the rule published. It'll be put in the Federal Register and you'll generally have a comment period. That comment period will be 45 to 60 days usually. And then you'll have an assessment period where USDA in this case will go back, look at the comments, and then they'll issue the final rule and implement on a certain date. So if you look at that scenario, from the time the rule is published, it may be as much as 90 days before we get the final rule out and published, to where you know when you'll be doing the sign up, the one-time irrevocable decision on ARC versus PLC. You'll have some time. So what I'm saying is you've got at least 2-3 months before we're going to actually have to make that decision. It'll be sometime either later this year or early in 2015. Now the caveat there is we're almost through the first year of the Farm Bill. It's a 5-year Farm Bill. So we're going to be, Jack, into the second year of the Farm Bill possibly when we're making some of these decisions. And the question is, what will the next Farm Bill look like? The one thing I will tell you to get ready for the next Farm Bill is to make sure you've got good records. Records will be the key. Make sure you make the best decision on these programs. These programs will go through 2018. So when you make that decision, it'll be December 31st, 2018 is when those decisions are supposedly good for. So if you got a good base, you're going to be in pretty good shape, regardless of whether we see a new Farm Bill or whether we see an extension of the current Farm Bill. So why is this Farm Bill so complicated? Okay, did you all follow any of the Farm Bill discussions? We started out with Farm Bill passing in the House, of course, but when you got into the Senate, you saw two different ranking members participating. The first ranking member you saw was Pat Roberts from Kansas. Pat was promoting the ARC concept and moving more of a Midwestern program. And kind of right in the middle, he termed out, and then Thad Cochran came in from Mississippi and became the ranking member. And what did you see? You saw PLC come into play, and you saw stacks with cotton. So you saw a Southern influence. So hence, we got two different programs that you have to choose from, okay? The countercyclical program was more popular with the corn, the peanuts and cotton and rice folks. So that's why you got two different programs, okay? So it's a little complicated because you got so much pulled together here. The dairy program's really no different. It's fairly complicated too. But you don't have as much that you have to keep up with. We'll go through it real quick. Well, let's back up a second. Again, you know, the thing to keep in mind with this farm bill that Todd hit on very much throughout his presentation is this is very much a risk management program. It's not like the old farm bills where you had the direct payments. It's not like the old farm bills where you had the countercyclical program that was going to kick in because of prices. You know, when you look at it, it is something that's supporting producer margins, especially on the dairy program, rather than supporting the price of milk. So you need to keep that in mind. We'll get more detail on the program. But the big change is that you do have a dairy margin protection program. That's the new part. You lost a couple of programs, you kept a couple of programs. But again, the caveat was it was supposed to be in place September 1st. You know, Darryl, it's not there. So the rules, when they come out, look through them really close. You know, it looks like it's going to be pretty much the way we've been kind of interpreting it. There's a few things that may surprise us when it comes in. The one part there is at the bottom where it says you could be in 1 year, out the next. When we were looking at it, it kind of led you to believe that. The way that I'm understanding it, it's going to be you're going to make a one-time decision. You cannot be in the livestock gross margin program that a lot of dairy producers participate in now and the dairy margin protection program. You got to choose between the two, so it's one or the other. Now the caveat with that is it's going to be a one-time decision, but you don't have to make that decision right now. You can choose to stay in the livestock gross margin program, the LGM program, and choose to sign up July 1st of next year or July 1st of the next year. You just can't be in both of them at the same time. But when you choose to be in, Javier, the way I understand it, to be in the DMPP, you're going to be in the DMPP until December 31st of 18. So that's where the decision needs to be made if that's the best program for you to be in. Every dairy farmer is eligible to participate. That's the caveat there. You basically will pay a $100 per year registration fee to be in the program, and then you've got the possibility of buying up margin. That's what you're protecting is your margin. The base margin is $4 between the actual cost of milk and the cost of production. Now, we're going to go through those real quickly, but your average dairy production margin is the national estimate of milk margin above feed cost. They're not your actual cost. We're going to go through that. You're going to have to decide your production, where you got to get your production history, you got to determine your coverage percentage and your coverage level. This is how it's figured. Now, what Todd was referring to, those numbers he throws up there give me a headache. This gives me a headache when you start trying to figure all this stuff out. But it's based on NASS reported data. It's the national all milk price. It's the NASS data on corn prices, soybean meal prices, and alfalfa hay prices. So how does that affect us as dairymen in Kentucky? When you look at dairymen in Kentucky, as far as the feed cost, Jack, we should probably be in pretty decent shape versus Western dairy that buys almost all of their feed. So we should be in pretty good shape there. But on the flip side, we generally have a little bit better milk price, believe it or not, than the Western states have. So it's going to be kind of a balance act there. So we have to figure all those numbers in. You choose, or it'll be the higher of those 3 years in your production to get your base level, and then that will adjust throughout time. It's divided into 6 parts. It's 2-month segments. So you have to hit the trigger price for both months before it triggers a payment. And we'll get into how that plays into the overall scheme of things. But if you just have the trigger hit 1 month, it doesn't kick it in. Okay, it's got to be the 2 consecutive months in that segment. The dairy product donation program is something different. It's kind of like the old commodity program. The secretary shall buy product whenever you hit those, any 2 consecutive months where it's below that trigger. He'll buy, or he's required to buy dairy products. That's to bring the market back up. Take product out of the flow, the market stream, and then bring the price up. And it's not a storage program like the old commodity program, David. It's, you buy it, you distribute it. It's not something that's stored long term. So what you're able to do in the dairy program is protect your margin. The base program, for $100, you get $4 margin protection. That's between the cost of production and the real price of milk, or the all price milk. You can buy up to $8 worth of margin protection. It gets more expensive. It's based on up to 4 million pounds and then over 4 million pounds. And then your premium levels are based on the level you want to buy up to. If you look at the way the program has worked, if you looked at the way the program would have worked over the last 4 or 5 years, at the $4 level, you would have probably seen the program triggered maybe 2 or 3 times, 4 times in that 5-year period of time. If you look at a $6 margin program protection, it probably would have kicked in about 8, 9, 10 times, 2-month period times. If you look at it $8, but the $8 margin when you buy up is going to be much more expensive per hundredweight of milk, it would have kicked in about 16 or 18 times. So more payment for the more margin you want to protect, which makes sense. But again, you got to decide what your risk factors are. Got to look at that and see where you want to be. So, again, we're just waiting on some other things to happen, but recognize this is a margin program that is basically a risk management agency program. It's really to protect your margins, okay? And one of the reasons why I think we haven't seen USDA come out with the rules any quicker than we have, since we don't have any dairymen here. But if you look at the price of milk, milk's been pretty good. It's been up around $20 a hundred. I think it's about 18 something now, Ed, maybe about 18.50, somewhere in there. But it's been pretty good. It's been as high as $24 a hundred. So there hadn't been a big rush because there's no big push to get something out in place. So that's why it's been a little slower getting it out. But I do expect the rules will be out really soon. There are some tools already out there, mostly Wisconsin where the milk is produced, have put together some tools. There'll be tools, a lot of tools available for the dairymen to utilize. The other thing I'll end up on some of the programs that were authorized in this farm bill, made permanent, that we had lost in 2011 whenever the funding basically ran out for them. The Livestock Indemnity Program, the ELAP program, the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, the Livestock Forage Program, and even the Tree Assistance Program that's available to our orchards. Those programs were reinstated, they were made permanent, they were made retroactive. Now, again, it comes back to the reasons why you need to keep records. If you've got the records, you can go back and file LIP claims for livestock that have been lost since 2011. But you got to have records. And talking to Marcinda, that can be photos, it can be dead wagon haul-off receipts, it can be veterinary statements. There's some things that you have to do to make that work, okay? But it comes back to records. It comes back to records. So that program is they can come in and file at the county offices basically any time up till, is there a deadline then? January? So again, this is an important program that was put back into the Farm Bill that will benefit us as livestock producers, because we probably have some beef cattle producers in here since we didn't have any dairy guys, okay? We got some beef cattle out there. But again, this kind of reminds me of the way that I had a farmer tell me a story about, he was sitting at his farm and he's watching this truck come down the road. And every so often the truck would stop and a guy would get out and dig a hole. He'd get back in the truck and the guy on the other side would get out and come in and fill in the hole. Then he'd drive about another 40 feet, same process would happen. Dig the hole and the other guy come out and fill the hole up. That's happened down the road for a little ways. So the farmer got kind of interested and he went down and he asked me, he said, what in the world are you all doing? He gets out, digs the hole, the other one gets in and fills in the hole. Well, this is kind of like Will and Todd and myself. Will's the one who's digging the hole, okay? Todd and I are going filling in the hole. USDA is the worker that was sick that didn't show up that day to put the tree in the hole before it got put back in. So, we're waiting on those rules and regulations to get published. So as soon as we get those, no. But anyway, we're waiting on those regulations to find out the specific details. And I didn't say FSA, I said USDA. So, but anyway, the key is, one, waiting for the regulations to get out, read the regulations, have your data together, make sure you've got good data to plug into these tools. Now the other thing, you've heard a lot of talk about price. You've heard a lot of talk about projecting out what it's going to be for several years. You know, there's a lot of things that affect price. Market affects price. The export markets. The other thing, now I'm colorblind, and when Todd starts throwing, you know, this thing up and he puts this little red light up on the screen, night before last when we were doing Owensboro, I was following this dot all over. I'm colorblind, so I'm following this dot all over the screen, and I'm not following Todd's presentation at all. I'm following a fly that's flying around on the screen. So I'm trying to figure out, what is he talking about? That's not the right thing he's talking about. But anyway, it was a fly. I couldn't see the little red dot. But this is black and white too, which I can see better than I can see colors because I can see the shades. But if you looked at the drought index for the United States, this is going to affect the prices. This will affect prices long-term out. So know what your markets are. Make sure you're watching everything. Because as you look forward, what you're doing is you want to develop the level of risk that you can handle at your operation. It's going to be different from me than it will be from you. You just need to know what your level of risk is, and then talk to your crop insurance agent, you know, talk to your financial planner, whoever it may be, and determine where that level is. And then go and get the product that fits your operation the best, because that's what this Farm Bill is all about, is risk management, okay? Now, on Jack's question about the bases, remember what I said about the comment period. There will be a comment period on the regulations when they come out. And I've been encouraging, especially our young farmers or the farmers who don't have bases, when that comment period comes out, put that in the comment. Make sure you send that comment in that there needs to be some format to be able to either establish bases or reestablish bases. May not happen because it's not written into this Farm Bill. You can reallocate base acres based on what it is historically, but there's no way to establish bases other than within the dairy program. There is a caveat there for a new dairyman to be able to get that base to where they can work with. But put that in the comments. If it doesn't happen this year when they reauthorize a Farm Bill or redo a Farm Bill, that's part of the official record. And they'll see that there's some need out there that if they're going to have it based on bases, that there needs to be an allocation there. We got into this discussion a couple of weeks ago. It's a far complicated issue than it is just to say we need to be able to establish bases. You got to figure out how it can be done in an equitable way. But put that in your comments. Are there any questions for Todd or Will?
Anything said about the livestock price protection cover policy?
You got to remember, crop insurance or risk management agency type products really haven't changed that much other than these 4 that were put back in. The crop insurance is a permanently authorized program. So within risk management, you've got those programs that are already out there. So really, the only thing that really changed was getting LIP, ELAP, and TAP, and the forage program back in. I don't know exactly where that one is. I don't think anything changed on it, did it?
I was just wondering, subsidy changed on it.
No, I don't think any of that changed. The thing is, the one thing that we're really looking at right now is we did get enhancement of crop insurance products or risk management program products. So we actually have a little bit better program than what we had last year going forward. So I think the next battle we're going to be fighting isn't going to be so much the Farm Bill per se as it is to protect what we've got with crop insurance assistance levels, because that'll be a target because budgets are tight, dollars are tight. They're going to look for dollars anywhere they can. So if we want to maintain the assistance level to make the premiums affordable for us, we may have to go and fight those battles whenever those come up, because there's been an effort almost every budget year that we've had that discussion, but it hasn't changed to my knowledge at all. So, any other questions? We'll be around. If anybody's got any questions, like I said, Marcinda and Javier, yes?
One thing you didn't touch on is that landowners make the decision not to farm.
Exactly. You need to keep in mind, this was a question last night a lot. Oh, and there's one other thing too. Remember section 179.40. The question came up last night a lot about how that decision is made. The decisions are based or tied to the land. So the other person you need to work with very closely is going to be your landlord if you don't own all of your land, because it's going to be very important you stay on the same page. So it is tied to the land. The question came up last night, what happens when land sells? Well, it's tied to that land, okay? That's where that decision is, so you want to make sure you have the most correct decision that you've got. The other thing I'll leave you with, Section 179. Anybody here know what I'm talking about on that? Section 179, bonus depreciation. Okay, you know that January 1st, that dropped from $500,000 to $25,000. The House has passed already language that would take that back to $500,000, index it for inflation, make it permanent. And they've also passed the bonus depreciation one too. So we're waiting on the Senate. The Senate will probably not take it up until after the election during the lame duck session, but we have pretty good feeling that they're going to make it at the $500,000 level. They're going to pass the bonus depreciation as well. They may not make it permanent. They may make it a 2-year extension that goes retroactive to January 1st of this year and cover next year. As you're talking to our senators, as you're talking to our congressmen, be sure and encourage them that we need to make this permanent. The House has already done it, but just keep encouraging them. We need to get this in permanent law. This is something that does stimulate the economy. It's not really a cost. So it's something that we want to make sure that we try and get permanent to where we can, you know.
It affects every segment of small business.
Every small business.
Every segment of agriculture or suppliers, the whole 9 yards.
And it does not take any time to use up $25,000. Anytime. It doesn't take up any time to use $500,000. But it's something that we need to make sure that our folks know about. But that will probably happen in November and then made retroactive. We're pretty confident that'll happen. Senator McConnell was at a conference the other day and he made that statement. He thought it'd be a 2-year extension. We'd like to see it made permanent.